Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Wednesday. Brian Kamenetzky, Andy Kamenetzky, more information on Jarred Vanderbilt and Christian Wood. Plus, the Lakers are going to honor Jerry West this season. Plenty to unpack next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers your first listen of every day, Monday through Friday. No matter how or where you get your podcasts, this one's always going to be free and never behind a paywall. And Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go hang out with over 25,000 subscribers to the channel, Andy, all of whom are reacting to the news the Lakers are going to honor Jerry West this season with it's not a jersey patch, it's a jersey stripe. That news came out on Tuesday. Given how there was a lot of anger in the Lakers community, Lakers fan community, about the way the Lakers responded when Jerry West died a few weeks back. So this is interesting news, but just as important, Andy, you have been the host of Lakers Talk on 710 ESPN now for one day, basically.
Mm-hmm.
You did your one show,
mm-hmm.
and already it is paying dividends where that show is providing content for this show. Well done.
I do my best. It is the off season. I had Dan Woike on as a guest. And by the way, just as a reminder, the show is basically Mondays, unless 710 carries USC, they carry the Kings. Obviously, they carry the Lakers as well. So there are days where that Monday slot, 7 to 9 p.m. Pacific, can be preempted, but it is largely going to be Mondays and definitely at least once a week from that 7 to 9 period. So go to 710 ESPN, go to the app, however you want to listen. But I had Dan Woike on from the LA Times, covers the team for the paper, and asked him about, first of all, if he had heard anything similar to what Mike Bresnahan had heard about Jarred Vanderbilt. Last week, Brez reported on the Spectrum Sportsnet podcast that he had been hearing that there is at least some concern that Jarred Vanderbilt could be available at the start of the season because perhaps of lingering issues with that problematic foot that kept him out for most of last season. And there's a lot of exact words from Dan. Said, quote, "They've been conservative this offseason because it was a fairly serious foot injury that it had suffered last year. It's not the first time that he's had a foot problem. I think the thinking was the target date isn't the first day of camp in a real way. I don't say that to be aggregated. I'm just saying the goal is to have him there long-term and not to rush through anything to get him there day one. My understanding is that he has been doing on-court stuff and was doing on-court stuff in my last check-in. I think since Brez said that on a podcast, there's been less chatter in my circles about what's really going on. I think we'll know more in the next couple weeks as we start to move towards that direction. There's a two-lane thinking to this. One, you don't want it to be last year, whereas Vando had issues early in the heel, take it slow, then the next thing you know, he's out till Thanksgiving. You don't want that. But there are other types of these training camp injuries and these things that happen as guys ramp it up over the summer that you just want to sort of nip in the bud and get it taken care of, because while the first season with JJ Redick and training camp is critical, especially with a new coach, you have to be available to play games. You have to be healthy. You're not going to help anybody if you're not healthy. So this gets to something I had mentioned, if nothing else, is kind of wish casting, Brian, that the idea that Vanderbilt not being available for the start of the season may not be so much a setback in whatever Vanderbilt's been doing to get ready as it is just really, extreme caution for a guy that has had a history of feet issues just in the last season with the Lakers, as opposed to, when we'll get into this, Christian Wood, what feels more possibly like an actual setback.
It's one of these things where it's good news like this. I almost used the word spin, and that's not fair. The impression that Dan has And because he says, this is not Dan in the building talking to Jarred Vanderbilt and the trainers and all these other things. This is his sort of intuition based on being pretty, obviously pretty well connected to what's going on inside the facility. This is as good of an interpretation as I think Lakers fans could hope for. You could have just as easily imagined a scenario where, especially given the secrecy is too strong a word. Is secrecy too strong a word the Lakers have around injuries?
Secrecy adjacent. They're not easy to get information. Even acknowledging that all teams around the league, if possible, want to keep this information more closed off for a variety of reasons. If nothing else, since when you and I first started covering the Lakers to where we are now, they are much less forthright with that information. You would agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. There's no question about that. And so, I find this encouraging. I find this idea that it is the sort of thing where they recognize the incredible importance of Vanderbilt and his ability to play this season. As Dan says, like, you can't help if you're hurt. And I think the scary part of this is if is the type of injury that it is. It's that it is his foot. It is something that Vanderbilt, I think, chose to not get surgically repaired. And there could be multiple reasons for that, in terms of, the recovery time, the efficacy of surgery, the particular injury, and all these other things. People assume surgery automatically means you'll be back and you won't get hurt again. That's obviously not the case. Just ask Christian Wood. And so, these are, hard decisions that athletes have to make. And I think that it is still lingering, that it is still in a place where you don't get people sort of stating confidently that Vando will be ready to go during training camp. I think that's going to make people nervous. That said, it could be a lot worse. Like, I think Dan would write if he knew that Jarred Vanderbilt was, quote unquote, behind in his return, because certainly the assumption was, it sucks he wasn't there for the end of last year, but he will be ready for the beginning of this one.
Especially since he had been made available for Game 5 of the playoffs against Denver, which, it is natural to assume that if somebody is being made available for Game 5, even if you think there's a high level of gamesmanship, it is totally natural to assume that if somebody is even just cleared to play in that game on any level in April, come October, they're going to be okay.
Right. And I think that's an expectation management thing.
Yes, because that's what I was.
This is the other part of how the Lakers do this, where I think they just, where you are damned if you do and damned if you don't, but there's an element of expectation management that goes on in play here. And I think the expectation management is because I'm pretty sure I said at the time that I didn't think Vanderbilt was going to play. I know when we talked about it a few days ago, I think that the idea that he was listed as available was 100% gamesmanship, and he really wasn't. He was there to provide Mike Malone something to think about, and at best was around for, if you need someone for, 4 minutes or something. Like I did not think there was a chance he was going to play in that game. Do the guy a favor, make it pretty clear, man, Jarred was taking one for the team to try to get back. He wanted to be available for his teammates, but he was really in no shape to play. We let him suit up, and, I guess could have gone to him in case of emergent, whatever it is, make that quick. But when you do your exit interviews, as you're leaving the building from game 5, that sort of nuance doesn't have a chance to really take hold.
They also, too, I think the Lakers are so paranoid about the perception of bad news, like the idea that Jarred Vanderbilt isn't all the way back. Oh, that's catastrophic. That's bad news, that you're not thinking about, okay, if you make it seem like he's too available in April, but you know that he could have a pretty rigorous, long rehab process to get back to the place where you truly feel comfortable with Jarred Vanderbilt playing the style that he plays, which is very demanding and very physical. You're concerning yourself too much about the short, I think at least, about the short-term media cycle and not enough about the overall picture of this.
So Dan had some things to say as well about Christian Wood, which clears up a little bit of that, and some thoughts about JJ Redick. We'll get to those things next.
Locked on Lakers is brought to you by Game Time and the best concert I have ever seen in my life. George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic. It was in 1992, the Palladium in Hollywood. They played, no exaggeration, 5 hours without a break. And ever since seeing a show that epic, I've been chasing a concert that could top it. Seen a couple handful that have come close. Prince at the Forum, Neil Young at the Greek, John Lee Hooker at House of Blues, a different George Clinton show, also at House of Blues. And as long as I keep that search going, I will always be using Game Time because they make it easier to find tickets. You actually look forward to it. Stuff like Game Time's new feature, Game Time Picks, which filters out all the confusing, flowery verbiage and shows you only incredible deals on great seats. It saves you time. And they offer panoramic seat views before you buy, so you know exactly what the view to the stage and your surroundings is going to look like. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off.
Dan Woike not only wrote about or talked to you about Vanderbilt, he also talked a little bit about Wood because, you know, we went in yesterday's show from "I'm back, baby" to "I'm out, baby." You know, this sucks, you know, in the immortal words of Chris Rock, grand opening, grand closing. And you know, wondering what happened here with Christian Wood, and who appears to, you know, certainly going to be gone longer than maybe Vanderbilt will be. You know, 8 weeks takes surgery out for 8 weeks takes Wood, just the evaluation period, into early November.
Right. And I asked Dan if he had heard this was a setback or any idea of what happened. And Dan said, quote, "So I asked around about this. And again, when it comes to the offseason stuff like this, specifics are kind of sparse. They're kind of hard to pin down. I don't believe this was the kind of thing like Wood was 100%. He had a workout and landed incorrectly. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh, we got to deal with this new thing or whatever." The way it's worded versus the conversations I had with Christian Wood earlier this summer when he was feeling really good and feeling really positive where his knee was at, this strikes me as the type of thing where you're recovering and then you have some soreness, and you have that type of soreness that you don't want to have. So you go in and you clean it up. That's what it seems like to me, but that's just more speculation than fact. The sense I've gotten at this point, setback is probably the right word, but not setback in a way like he was 100%, landed incorrectly. Now we're back to square one. That's not the sense I've gotten, but it's disappointing, right? He's a guy that, at least on paper, fits some of what JJ Redick wanted to do on offense in terms of getting up a higher volume of three-point shots. You don't have to tell Christian Wood more than once that you want him to shoot. So this fits the sense that you and I had that something was going well for Wood until it stopped. And first of all, I think it's worth noting this because I've seen a few comments on the Locked On Lakers YouTube page with people angry at Christian Wood, feeling like he waited a long time to do this, knowing it was necessary, basically
quote unquote company time injury.
Right, pulling a Shaq company time. I will just say, without you and I being in any way dialed into this situation, unless Christian Wood either has decided after 2025, I have no interest in playing in the NBA anymore, or is just a complete effing idiot. The idea that he, playing on a veteran's minimum contract, trying to reestablish both his value as a player and, frankly, his reputation as somebody who's known as kind of an empty calories, selfish, bit of a flake, the idea that he would knowingly wait this long to get surgery, cost himself time on the court, time that he could actually entrench himself into a rotation on a team that will be getting a lot of attention. Again, he's either decided I'm done with the league, or he is one of the dumbest players you and I have ever covered. I don't think either is the case. I think Christian Wood is as surprised about this and is disappointed about this as either one of us are.
Like you say, like, he's not just kicking back, you know, making the joke. Like, for people watching on YouTube, it's like, oh, we're at 8, you know, what are we, 6 weeks away from training camp? Perfect time for surgery. Let's get this done. Or 3 weeks.
Ruining my trip to the Bahamas over this.
Yeah. You know, my ruse about telling everybody things were going great just so I could get my surgery even later really paid off. I mean, yes. I mean, I think there are plenty of things and times and moments where it's been fair to question Christian Wood in his time in the league. I do not think this is one of them.
I would be stunned if that's the case. Honestly, right. I would find it shocking.
And I will say this too. It is, I mean, again, I can't say it, but it feels pretty clear to me this is a recurrence of the injury. And
same procedure on the same knee.
Right. That's what I'm, again.
Same doctor. I mean, same press statement. It was the same press statement, except for the last sentence.
I mean, and probably maybe he wore the same, you know, shorts to the surgery center. I mean, I wore the same hoodie for the birth of all 3 of my children. It was a good luck birthing hoodie. So, I mean, maybe he's got his shorts or t-shirt that he wears. I'm also not willing to say anybody did anything wrong, because, you know, what these guys are doing. We joke sometimes about people like saying, you know, you retweeted something somebody put out the other day, and, you know, or last week or something like that, and we've mentioned on the show that, like, the greatest, you know, sort of misconception that people have in sports, that fans have, is how close they are to the guys who play professionally. And so, you know, what it takes to recover from surgery and get yourself back into a place where you can play NBA level basketball requires a lot of physical effort. And there are plenty of places, plenty of moments, and plenty of times where that path back through no one's fault can go wrong. And, you know, the knee bends just a little bit wrong in one way, or you land slightly awkwardly, a little too much, whatever it might be, and you find yourself hurt again, and it sucks. But it is good to get, you know, just a little bit more background, if nothing else. I thought what he's had to say about Redick, in addition to that, was also pretty interesting.
Yeah, so I asked Dan something along the lines of what he thinks is going to be JJ Redick's biggest challenge as a coach in terms of just the newness of it all, and how he will deal with the things that he doesn't know in real time, figuring that sort of stuff out and just dealing with that specific kind of adversity. And for those who don't know, Dan actually covered the Clippers for several years for the LA Times before switching over to the Lakers. And it was at that time when Redick was a member of the Clippers. And Dan said, quote, one of the challenges is going to be, and I remember thinking about this as soon as I heard about Redick's candidacy, is what is his patience level for people who don't put into this as much as he does, because he is going to work. He is a worker. And I asked Redick, like, are you talking about the players? Are you talking about guys on his coaching staff, like the front office? And Dan said, quote, everything. It is one of those things where he, being Redick, is such a worker, and he is somebody that wants to maximize and be efficient and not waste his time, and really make sure at the end of the day, there's no real regrets about how he spends his day. He is very obsessive in that way. Again, he has great social intelligence, and that will help him deal with people that are different than him. But that is going to be a challenge for him in some ways, because there are going to be guys who don't approach it in the exact same way as him. And Dan went on to note that he's just always been very good with people. JJ Redick, like he was often a bridge in the very well documented personality clashes that went on between Blake Griffin and Chris Paul as a member of the Clippers. And he's always just been generally pretty well liked in locker rooms, like a pretty popular teammate. So that those people skills may be helpful, but he really emphasized like JJ Redick is somebody that is obsessive, not just about basketball, but like all the work that goes into planning great basketball. And he is not going to have seemingly much patience for those around him who don't seem to be as into not just the process, but all the nitty gritty of the process.
I have a thought about that that's going to impact, I think, his ability to, his growth as a coach. I want to get to next, and obviously the Jerry West stuff too. But do want to let you know today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. More Redick and Jerry West next.
Locked on Lakers is brought to you by eBay. Passion, drive, and patience. It's what brings home the winning trophy. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, or all of the above, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you are burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers.
On the one hand, Andy, we know from Rob Pelinka that the Lakers wanted a grinder. They wanted a guy who's going to grinding all the time. What's he doing now? You're grinding. What are you going to be doing later? Grinding. What about tomorrow? Grinding some more. And so, obviously when Dan talks like that about Redick and that sort of obsession with detail and the compulsion to work, that's exactly what Rob Pelinka wanted. And it's good. In some ways, it's quite good. It is, though, particularly when you are a first-year coach. It's something he's going to have to manage, because you have to figure out ways to disconnect. You have to figure out ways in any profession to separate yourself, even for moments, from what it is that you're doing and find other things, because otherwise, you're not going to be a grinder. You're going to be ground. And that is a something, how he adapts to the, I guess, sort of the day-to-day ups and downs and ebbs and flows of coaching. And most of these guys, coaches, are just like the players. They remember the failures and they focus on the failures much more than they do successes. How he responds to failure is going to be, I think, a marker of how quickly he can improve as a coach, because there's going to be a lot of failure. Do you stay with what you, and this is always that thing, like coaches have to do I trust what I'm doing and that will come around, and the results are more random than they are indicative of something wrong with what we're doing. Do we have to change things? Do we take Austin Reeves out of the starting lineup? Do we put Cam Reddish? Like all of these big decisions that even last year with the criticisms of Darvin Ham, most of them in a vacuum were defensible. And then how you do it. So, I mean, it's just that kind of stuff is fascinating to read about Redick, but it's also one of these things that we look at and say, awesome, great, grinder. But, there are some, at least for me, some red flags that he's going to have to accommodate if he's going to do this job well.
I think what you're talking about is true, but that concerns me more for the course of his career as a coach, however long that lasts, as opposed to his first season with the team. The idea of burnout and something like grinding himself to a pulp, I don't disagree with you that if he is truly that obsessive without finding at least some type of off ramps, at least periodically, yeah, that could be an issue, but it doesn't worry me about this first season.
I'm not worried about burnout in the first year. What I do think is a relevant thing, though, is a sort of form of that where it's not that he's going to walk away from coaching. He can't do it, whatever, but it's that sense of the sort of the pressure of individual moments, of this sort of pulling you out of where you're confident, pulling you out of, where your belief system or whatever it is, and your confidence that you're taking the things in the right way. That first set of failures is going to be really hard for him, because he's not a guy who's necessarily used to that. And, he will, so there are certain things you can't grind your way out of.
It's interesting.
You have to allow things to happen sometimes.
It's interesting. And obviously we have no idea how Redick is truly going to react to this till we see him do it. Like this is all just, clay waiting around to be molded. But based on what we've seen from Redick over the course of his career, the way he talks about the game and adaptability, he talks about a lot of big picture and process, but also JJ Redick, it's become, I think, easy to forget because he was such a big star at Duke. And he ultimately had such a successful role player career and then quickly conquered the media space that, like, early in Redick's career, there was a lot of frustration and failure. And he had trouble early on in Orlando getting the minutes that he wanted, getting the role that he wanted. Like, he actually had to deal with a fair amount of adversity that I think has been forgotten in some ways, that I think that can help him, I think, adapt some degree of patience. In terms of, again, just seeing big picture. I also just get a sense that JJ Redick knows what he wants and is pretty confident that it's the right thing. Again, it remains to be seen what the thing that he wants actually looks like and how successful it'll be. I'm not particularly concerned about him, though, getting knocked off his confidence with losses. My take on this was actually very different. In terms of hearing about the stressing on details and the idea of really being meticulous from the beginning and like everybody better take on that same attitude, I actually found that really refreshing because I feel like, especially with training camp and preseason, a lot of the regular season, this organization's been really casual. And I don't mean that like they've necessarily phoned in the regular season, because I don't think that's been the case. But I also don't think there's often been as much urgency as there's needed to be. And like the idea of we need to use the regular season as a lab to become the best version of ourselves, between the concerns that come with the long view of LeBron at his age, AD to a lesser but still tangible level, and honestly, the championship or bust ethos of this organization that I think sometimes devalues the regular season. Redick ain't going to be like that. It doesn't seem like. And
I love the idea of attention to detail and really noticing the small things. And
especially we've talked about, I don't think Rob Pelinka is a small detail guy. So like somebody needs to be that person.
And I think if you ask Darvin would say, yeah, we were into the details, but also which details? I mean, like, I'm not going to sit here and like Darvin didn't look at numbers or didn't look at film or different, but it's like, what are you looking at? And I mean, both of those guys are obviously more qualified to justify the decisions that they make around, film study and strategy and things like that than I am. But, there is not all time spent giving attention to detail is good time, because if you're giving attention to the wrong stuff, if you're prioritizing the wrong stuff, if you're using the details to make poor decisions, then that time, you'd have been better off just letting somebody else do it and come up with something else, roll into the office that, 10 minutes before game time. And so, there's just, these are really hard jobs. And, I mean, Rob's job is super hard, and and I'm sure he gets annoyed that a couple of yokels just have their daily podcast and criticize the work that he does.
Well, he's welcome to come on anytime he wants and debate us. That invitation's open. He can come on 5 days a week for all I care. Actually, for all I care, I'd love it if he came on 5 days a week. That would be amazing.
I'd even, Andy, be okay. I would too. I'd even be okay if he made us his second listen of every day, not even his first listen.
Sure.
But like the flip side of that, Andy, is that he is also far better compensated for the inconvenience of listening to podcasters talk about his work. Like he makes a lot of money to do what he does. And to some degree, it's like, figure it out. Like this is what you are put in charge of. Nobody said it was easy, but if you want an easier job, don't take this one. And I feel to some degree, Darvin was in a similar boat. Like I really hope he gets a chance to be an NBA head coach again. I think he will.
I think he will. Too.
I think for most organizations, he would have gotten a third season. It's just not for this one and not the way things went last year. Because, the season before he went to the Western Conference Finals. And was it all him? No, but generally speaking, I think he did a pretty good job. He held the team together under very difficult circumstances. He didn't do it last year under very difficult circumstances. And that's all part of the learning curve, I think, of being a coach, where he will spend a year or two thinking about, man, I think I could have done these 5 things differently over the course of last season, and it would have turned out better for me. Some of those are probably strategic. Some of those are probably management questions and all of that. But it is really hard. And it gets to the challenge that Redick has, because he doesn't have that history to lean on for self-reflection. He's going to be putting the plane together as he's trying to fly it.
But as far, though, as the season itself, we've learned that we'll get into more of this in Thursday's show, like a deeper discussion of it. But the Lakers are going to be honoring Jerry West throughout the entire season. They're going to be wearing a 44 band across the left shoulder of their uniform in all 82 regular season games. Opening night against the Timberwolves at the Crypt, fans will be getting a Jerry West 44 jersey. And I imagine there will be some type of video tribute. I think this is going to be really a night, the opening of a season that will pay tribute to arguably the greatest Laker of all time, certainly on the short list of candidates. And we'll get into more of this on Thursday, but there had been a lot of dissatisfaction and controversy among Laker fans when it came to the Lakers' initial handling of Jerry West passing. So this is hopefully the first in a series of steps that can help fans and the organization and Jerry West's family all feel whole again.
Yeah, let us know what you think. We'll use some comments about whether or not this gesture from the Lakers changes the way that you feel about how they handled things when West actually passed. And we try to fold that into tomorrow's show. Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go hang out with over 25,000 subscribers. Make Locked On NBA your second listen of the day. Link can be found right in the show description. Don't even have to search for it. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'll see everyone tomorrow.